Good afternoon.
Senator Waters, Senator
Good
Perkins
afternoon.
Copa, how are you? Good.
Good, how are you?
All right.
Good afternoon.
Yep, we're all set, Senator.
We are all set. Wonderful. Welcome. I'm Senator Kevin Avard from the Senate District 12. Today we'll be holding a meeting of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. And before we get started, I'll read through the checklist to ensure that the meeting that we're holding is in compliance with the right to know law. As chair of Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, I find due to the emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04 and its extensions, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. In accordance with the emergency order, I'm confirming that we provide public access to the meeting by meeting by telephone, with additional access possibly by video and other electronic means. We're utilizing Zoom for this electronic meeting. All members of the committee and selected legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously in this meeting through the platform, and public has access to the contemporaneously, I'm going too fast, to watch and listen to the meeting on Zoom or YouTube and via phone by following the directions and links provided on the General Court website. We have provided notice of the necessary information for accessing the meeting in the Senate calendar. We are providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there are any problems with the access. If anyone has a problem, please email remotesenate@leg.state.nh.us or call 603-271-6931. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting, it will be adjourned and rescheduled. Please note that all votes taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. Finally, let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. When each member states their presence, please state also where they are and if there's anyone in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under the right to know law. I will now call the roll. Senator Gaida.
Senator Guide is at my home in Warren with my daughter, grandson, and dog upstairs. I'm in this room alone.
Thank you. Senator Gray.
This is James Gray. I'm at my home in Rochester in District 6, and I'm alone in this room.
Senator Waters.
Senator Waters, District 4. I'm home in my home in Dover, alone in this room.
Senator Perkins Quokka.
Yes, sir. Senator Perkins Quokka. I'm at my office in downtown Portsmouth, and I am alone in this room.
And I'm Senator Kevin Avard, District 12, in my office in Nashua. And I do have my dog in the room with me somewhere. And there are other people in the house, but not in my office. And so with that, we shall get started. Griffin, what is our first bill to hear? It is Senate Bill 151.
Correct. And Senator Waters is the prime sponsor.
And Senator Waters, you are the prime sponsor. Welcome, Senator Waters, and let's hear your bill.
Well, thank you, Chairman Avard and members of the committee. Senator David Waters, District 4. And I'm here to introduce Senate Bill 151 relative to renewable energy procurement. What I'd like to do today is to talk very briefly about offshore wind in general, its potential in New Hampshire and along the East Coast, and then turn to why procurement is a good idea. And then if we're going to do procurement, why this bill attempts to do what's best for the people of New Hampshire. Now, as far as the offshore wind industry goes and the Gulf of Maine development, I mean, we're all here with this bill because of the leadership of Governor Sununu. 3 years ago, he called upon the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management to form a Gulf of Maine task force composed of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine. And this was to take advantage of the accelerating development of offshore wind off the East East Coast and the enormous potential because the Gulf of Maine has some of the best wind sources in the world for development in our area. And the governor was particularly concerned that we have this task force composed so New Hampshire could take advantage of this development in terms of jobs, economic development, and lower cost energy. The BOEM Commission held the first task force meeting a year ago, December. COVID has delayed it a bit in terms of recommencing, but I think we're going to have another meeting within the next few months. And there is a great acceleration of offshore wind development that has occurred over the last year and is occurring now. So just an example of what we're seeing along the East Coast. There's already about 30 gigawatts committed of offshore wind projects. That represents $120 to $180 billion investment and tens of thousands of jobs. For the Gulf of Maine, we are looking at perhaps $20 to $30 billion investment in the supply chain and construction, and about 25,000 jobs in pre-development construction and maintenance and supply chain. And those are new jobs. And there has been an acceleration of development of projects. One is a good comparison for us is Vineyard Wind, which sometime in next week or two will get its final environmental permits from the SEC, and not much long after that, they hope to get shovels in the water, shall we say. And that's about an 800 gigawatt project. And, initial for New Hampshire, maybe we're looking at about 3 gigawatts initially, but put out in sections and parcels. So that's a good comparison, 800 megawatts, and that powers about 400,000 homes, just to give you a sense of the scale that we're talking about. So Governor Sununu, has reiterated his leadership and his commitment to offshore wind. We approved last year the bill to establish the Offshore Wind Commission, and it has been running with its monthly meetings since September, and some of you are familiar with that bill. You can take a look and see what we have been up to there. In terms of more information on offshore wind and developments in New England, the Gulf of Maine, and further to the south of us, you can go to the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and get very good figures and graphs. The timeline we're looking for New Hampshire is in the next year or two to identify the area in the Gulf of Maine that would be appropriate for leasing, get the leases out, and a long process there of environmental review and otherwise. And then 5 to 7 years from now is when we're looking at the construction and coming online with this. So let me turn to the procurement process. In some ways, I think the reason there's such interest from all political spectrum and from all parties in offshore wind is that you might come for the jobs, but then you'll stay for the renewable energy. And you might come to this for renewable energy, but you're going to stay for the jobs. I suggest there are 3 questions around procurement, which I'm going to try to answer, and I think we're going to have answered by a lot of the people who are testifying and follow me. Will procurement mean the lowest possible cost for ratepayers? Right now, the most recent contract that has gone out for that Vineyard Wind is about 5 cents a kilowatt, which is competitive now. And what they call the learning on offshore wind is every time you double capacity of installed, you have a 17% decrease in costs. So by the time, very soon we're going to have some of the lowest cost power you can possibly buy. The second question is, will procurement leverage industry investment? And do we need to do it now? And I think you'll hear from the testimony that the answer to those 3 questions from the industry is yes. That the other states around us have gone forward or have gone forward with procurement, and they're seeing major investments And this is the kind of investment, I mean, why I bring this bill forward is the kind of investment we could have. We want them to come to the Port of Portsmouth. We want them to come to private land that's developed there. We want the jobs and the manufacturing and supply chain as much as possible to come to businesses here. And this is why Taylor Caswell has staffed the Office of Offshore Wind Development and focusing primarily on how we develop our opportunities for New England businesses for this industry. And I will say too that one of the arguments here about a procurement now is that we can take advantage of the power that is being made available through very, very large procurements to the south of us, and that Eversource and others believe that they can pick up pieces of those at extremely competitive prices for our ratepayers and then tee us up for the Gulf of Maine project as well. Just as an overview of the process that you're going to see through in the bill, which I'm going to go through now, is that at every point, this bill is designed to give authority to the governor. The governor will appoint the group that looks at proposals. The governor at any time can pull the plug on whether this goes forward. And in particular, it outlines the criteria whereby those decisions can be made. And front and center is the New Hampshire ratepayer. We don't want there to be hidden costs. We don't want there to be costs that will burden ratepayers and, to all customers and so on. I mean, that's a granite principle of the governor. It's one that I share. So I have crafted the bill, as you see. You're going to keep seeing that phrase, upon approval of the governor, in here, and that's the point. That's the way things work in New Hampshire. The bill sets out the process and principles then of how would a procurement work for New Hampshire of up to 800 megawatts of renewable power. It sets up a two-stage process. This is very much modeled on what other states are doing. You need to have a body that will vet the proposals that come in from the developers and the utilities to be sure that it meets the jobs interests, the economic development interests, the ratepayer interests, the environmental interests, New Hampshire interests. Then the second part of the process is the handoff to the PUC and what principles and processes the PUCs undergoes to approve those procurement proposals that again best serve the consumers in New Hampshire. So if you wouldn't mind turning to the bill itself, and I've already droned on a lot, and you know me, but I just want to walk through some of the places, the process here. I've had some conversation with David Shulock and the PUC. You should have at the last minute received a fiscal note. Basically a lot of indeterminable, and that's just the nature of procurement. He points out some areas that, where those areas will be, which will have to really determine what the costs are for the ratepayers. And that's what this process is all about, is determining that so we can make good decision. And again, under the power of the governor to determine that that is actually the case. So we have some definitions of the kind of generation that's covered by this procurement. There is a change that's been suggested by David Shulock about how we ensure that the hydro that's included here is not coming in from Canada. It's not Hydro-Quebec. It's meant to benefit the smaller hydro producers. And I have some language that can take care of that. But that's been a question I wanted to make sure of that. Then at the bottom of the first page and going on to the second page, the authorized for a procurement process to be underway. First place and most importantly, that if there have been reasonable proposals received and upon approval of the governor there on lines 1 and 2, and that these proposals can be selected by the Renewable Energy Procurement Committee and sent over to the PUC. That there'll be a competitive bidding process for long-term contracts upon approval of the governor again. The solicitations, and this is important because of the Gulf of Maine being a tri-state project, and also the ability of our utilities, which are working in other states, to get very best prices if they do a joint solicitation with other states. So this might be just in New Hampshire pieces of the solicitation, or it might be that solicitations with the other states for a piece of power coming out of other areas, as well as the Gulf of Maine. So the EDCs and the what I'm going to use called the REPC, the Renewable Energy Procurement Commission, will do competitive solicitations upon approval of the government, of the governor. The middle of page 2, it sets at 800 megawatts of aggregate nameplate capacity in the procurement. That number seemed about right for the potential here and the capacity of the utilities to want to be able to use that and purchase that power. The bill does say 600 as a floor for the offshore wind, and then up to 200 that could go to offshore wind, but also might go to hydro, biomass, and solar. As you may know, Senator Bradley was particularly interested that this bill include the hydro and the biomass. But for those who like flexibility, maybe we'll just say 800 and be technology agnostic on that, and let the process determine the sources of it. So down at the bottom then is where we get into the cost and benefits. The PUC needs to consider the cost and benefits. Needs to be a cost-effective mechanism there that will be determined. Then if you go on to there's a lot more detail about the contracts and so on, but I'd like to go down to the bottom of page 3, that the commission shall adopt rules for this process in terms of proposing the long-term contracts. That as other states are done, there's an annual remuneration for the contracting distribution companies of, it says up to 2.75%. They've been advised that maybe just set it at 2.75. That's what the other states do, and it provides stability going forward. Also importantly, at the bottom of the page, the transmission costs must be included so that we have a true picture of just what this is going to cost to the consumers, because that, as we know in New Hampshire, that's so important. And onshoring this power is going to be an important part of this project. At the top of the page, that it's instructing, however, that the transmission costs should be mitigated as much as possible, so that transmission cost overruns are not borne by ratepayers, And there are opportunities as well for federal funding on that transmission, as I understand as well. So on page 4, the criteria for the Public Utility Commission to evaluate, and these basically are the same criteria that will govern that Renewable Energy Procurement Committee, which gets the proposals ready to go over to the PUC. So here's the criteria. Enhanced electricity distribution, we want reliability. We want there to truly be a public need for this power, and we want a just and reasonable price. We want to do whatever we can to reduce winter electricity price spikes, which have been an interest, issue has been driving up very high. And then reiterating, cost effective to electric ratepayers, and taking into consideration potential economic benefits, and then employment and economic development in New Hampshire. So here's that leverage to try to get as much industry located here. Then importantly too, while the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management in approving projects does the major environmental review, that's one of the big things that they do, fisheries, everything else involved in the environment. I thought it was very important to have it in our criteria as well, that as we examine all these contracts, we want the EDCs to prove that they have done due diligence on fisheries, on the environment, and transit lanes and other issues. So let me just skip down now to page 5. There's some language here on renewable energy credits. As you can imagine, they will be substantial in a process like this, and how those credits are held or sold, and how, again, it will benefit the ratepayer. It's important in 2 places in the bill that there are required reports and reviews to see how these contracts are going, whether they're delivering. So there's one here, and then there's one further down as well. So then the bill sets up this Renewable Energy Procurement Committee. This is something every state has a kind of process like this. It has to be a 2-stage process. We have to get the proposals brought in and vetted to make sure that they meet the state's needs and the governor's approval before they're handed off to the PUC. Some states like Connecticut just says that the head of the Department of Energy just has that power. And obviously no, this power is going to reside in the governor's hands, and that's the way this is set up. You'll see the members that are set up here. The governor appoints, so the governor will have control of that process. And also, there should be an independent evaluator involved, so we can get some outside disinterested expertise to make sure that this evaluator, will know that this is in these contracts, and the bid and solicitation process are in the best interests of New Hampshire. You'll see some provisions, as other states have. And Eversource and Unitil and everybody else are used to, in the industry, used to these, to make sure that we take a look to New Hampshire jobs here, and workforce development too, apprentice programs and so on. The states that do procurements have big investments that have come in for workforce development programs in the state. And then page 7, another kind of fuller requirement that the folks who are coming into this REPC will have done due diligence in all the environmental issues as well. Just a little bit further along, at the very end of the bill, you see there's an energy and capacity requirements report every 2 years. Get an update. How's it going? Is it meeting the criteria? How do we best meet the electrical demands in the state by reducing peak demand? How to manage growth in electric demand, energy and capacity requirements for the customers for the next 5 years. So we're really, through this reporting requirement, have a picture of where we are and where we're going. And, again, towards the bottom there, energy security and economic risks associated with potential energy resources. So I've just tried to layer in here, as I said, beginning, at every level, the governor has full control of this process. And at every level, we're looking at the cost to the consumer. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I thank you for indulging me in this time to go through all this, but I thought it was good to lay out the whole picture. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, for your hard work. I wish I had your gift. I really do. Any questions from the committee? All right. Seeing none, Jen?
Okay, so at the direction of the chair, what we're going to do today is we're going to do a 5-minute limit with a 4-minute warning time. So you'll have a minute to wrap up. And we're going to start first with Liz Donahue.
Excuse me.
Good afternoon, Senators. I'm Liz Donahue with Eversource Energy, and Eversource's position on Senate Bill 151 is neutral because we believe the decision whether or not to move forward with any clean energy procurement, including for offshore wind, is a public policy decision that rests with you as lawmakers. Should you determine that it is prudent to move forward with this bill, Eversource believes that our role is to ensure a smooth and as low-cost process as possible. I was tapped to testify today on Senate Bill 151 because of my experience with procurements in neighboring states. Procurements are nothing new in the region. States like Connecticut and Massachusetts have issued multiple procurements over the years, as well as Rhode Island. Again, should you determine that procurements are good for New Hampshire, we believe that it would be helpful to review what those states have learned, as Senator Waters made reference to, and also of the experiences of utilities and developers who have participated in these procurements. No matter how you proceed in New Hampshire, we are happy to provide any information concerning other states' procedures at any time. And with that, I'm happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Questions from the committee? Senator Waters.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Liz. It's good to hear you again. And so just a couple of questions. In terms of the procurement, is your sense from what you're seeing in the other states that my statement about procurements as being a vehicle for ensuring we have long-term good prices for this renewable energy?
Yes, that's what states have been going for. So they would have a certain price or a known price, even if it escalated over time. But that's the goal, is to lock it in for a long-term period of time, as opposed to being on the spot market.
If I may follow up, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
And it's your sense, given the scale of, the thousands and thousands of procurement megawatts that are out there now, from New Jersey north, really, is it your sense that the possibility would be for Eversource to get some pieces of those very large procurements, because at that scale, the price will be good?
Are you speaking on the utility side or okay? I can't speak to that precisely. I think that would be the goal, that as a utility, when they're doing procurements and looking more towards renewable energy, right, drive to the lowest price. I happen to be on the offshore wind side of the business, and so I can't be more specific than that, but certainly we hope to win some procurements when that time comes.
And one more follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
I know that Eversource has partnered with Ørsted, which is one of 3 or 4 major developers that are already, have projects and contracts and so on the East Coast. And, the question I asked at the start of the hearing, is it your sense from what you see in other states that doing a procurement helps to leverage industry investment in the state?
Yes, that has certainly been the case in all of the procurements that have been to date, particularly in New York, but Rhode Island also has significant investment going on as well.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee members? Oh, seeing none. Thank you. Thank you very much, Liz. Next.
Okay. Next up, we have Rob Werner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Rob Werner. I'm the state director here in New Hampshire for the League of Conservation Voters. LCV is in strong support of assertive clean energy procurement goals for a variety of reasons. I would look on this bill really as an economic development opportunity bill and initiative, in addition to the environmental aspects of it in terms of clean energy and certainly addressing climate change. It really takes an approach that has positive developments on all those things. This bill, Senate Bill 151, really supports and continues the work that the governor has initiated with the Gulf of Maine Task Force, with the position at the Department of Business and Economic Affairs, with the establishment of the Gulf of Maine, or the commission that Senator Waters mentioned and serves on. So I would really urge this committee to pass this bill and get it moving through the legislative process. You know, there's so much activity going on to our south in terms of steel in the water. That's actually, steel in the water has occurred in Virginia in terms of offshore wind. The investments are huge. The economic development opportunities are unparalleled. The job creation opportunities are something that we must take advantage of as a state and a region, and being part of that region. So I'd urge you not to leave this opportunity on the table. It addresses so many things at once that really need addressing and will be a very strong benefit to our state, our community, and our residents. So we are very much in support of Senate Bill 151. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? I just have one. First time I heard the phrase steel in the water. Could you elaborate?
Well, steel in the water means the wind turbines that are actually operating. So we have a smaller wind farm down at Block Island, which I think you're aware of, but in Virginia, we have a large scale situation and initiative that's actually operating and producing electricity and moving it into the state of Virginia as we speak. So it is really the first large scale off the coast of the Atlantic Ocean state that's producing that. And it's something that we can look forward to.
And so that's what steel in the water means?
Steel in the water. Yes. Actual projects that are up and running and built.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Seeing none. Jen?
Okay, next up we have Rebecca Newberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of the committee. My name is Rebecca Newberry. I'm of the Blue Green Alliance. We're a national partnership of labor unions and environmental organizations that are also located throughout the state of New Hampshire. So we see offshore wind providing an incredible opportunity to grow New Hampshire's economic development. We support this bill and strongly support the language that's detailed on page 7, sections 4 and 5 regarding requirements for both project labor agreements and state recognized apprenticeship programs. Both apprenticeship programs and project labor agreements are needed in order to truly capture the economic potential of offshore wind. Apprenticeship utilization can reduce the risk of cost overruns or substandard work, while project labor agreements provide comprehensive guidance for large projects. Project labor agreements are also a way to open the door to domestic supply chain development. In the absence of local content requirements, developers may import component parts entirely from Europe or Asia. So by requiring projects to be constructed by project labor agreements, developers will have more opportunity to utilize components from deeper in the domestic supply chain. Our recommendations going forward are to add local hire criteria to bid requirements to create jobs and generate economic activities. We saw in the state of Minnesota, studies showed that the use of just 10 to 30% of local workforce to build a 1.4 gigawatts of new wind projects could generate between 41 to 57 million in local economic activity. So this impact increases alongside the percentage of local hires. We also suggest to add language to prioritize projects that will source a high percentage of components from US-based manufacturers. This is an opportunity for New Hampshire jobs. And so one way to increase economic growth is to require bidders to demonstrate in their proposals the percentage of materials the project will source from the United States. As the industry grows, sourcing components domestically represents a significant opportunity to help revitalize American manufacturing. The Special Initiative for Offshore Wind's recent white paper predicted a nearly 70 billion build out of US offshore wind supply chain by calculating the growth in numerous sectors. Procurements can drive economic investment and revitalization to New Hampshire. So we support any legislation that will accomplish these goals and ensure that New Hampshire takes full advantage of this emerging opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rebecca. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none.
Okay, next up we have Dan Collins.
Welcome, Dan.
Welcome, and thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Dan Collins. I am the Director of Government Affairs for the New England Power Generators Association, and thank you very much for this opportunity to testify today. NEPCA is a trade organization that represents electric power generators that compete in New England's wholesale electricity markets. Our members account for roughly 90% of the installed generating capacity in New England, over 4,000 megawatts in New Hampshire, and own and operate a variety of generating resource types. NEPCA respectfully opposes SB 151. SB 151's call for long-term contracting of specific resources would set New Hampshire backward on the path that it laid when it passed its Restructuring Act back in the late 1990s. Restructuring was enacted to address the high costs and inefficiencies of utility-owned generation. Importantly, it opened up competition between merchant generators and shifted the risk of cost overruns and stranded costs from utility ratepayers to private investors. The result has been wholesale energy prices that have declined by 51% since 2004. And in fact, the average annual wholesale electricity price in 2019 was the second lowest price since the markets were fully implemented in 2003. The competitive markets have also produced a cleaner, more efficient fleet of power plants, driving down carbon emissions by 50% since 1990. Now, long-term contracting for certain resources, as proposed by SB 151, distorts market pricing, which undermines the commercial viability of competitive resources that do not receive a guaranteed revenue stream outside the markets. This could then lead to additional contracting to replace those lost opportunities, further resulting in inefficient and costly outcomes. And SB 151 would put New Hampshire ratepayers on the hook for the costs and investments of the bill's long-term contracts, in this case for up to 30 years, which guarantee revenue regardless of the value or wisdom of those investment decisions. New Hampshire knows well the downside of these kinds of arrangements. Ratepayers are still paying the price for cost overruns associated with investments and environmental controls at the Merrimack station, then owned by PS&H. The competitive markets offer a better path, one that provides cost-effective and reliable supply of energy without the risk to New Hampshire's ratepayers. That's why NEPCA is pleased to join other stakeholders in ongoing regional efforts to identify wholesale market changes to better address state concerns, while leveraging the cost and reliability benefits of the markets. We ask the committee to allow these regional efforts toward market reforms to continue, rather than rely on long-term contracting, which exposes ratepayers to additional costs and risk. NEPCA has submitted detailed written testimony on SB 151, but for now, I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you very much.
Questions from the committee? Senator Waters.
Thank you, Dan, for being here, and I certainly appreciate all that you've said. And I just thought, I think wouldn't it be fair to say that because the offshore wind developers are separate entities to the EDCs in respect to restructuring, that is something, I mean, that principle is potentially adhered to?
Well, thank you, Senator, for your question. And I think that may be true in terms of the way that these entities are organized. But I think really the bigger issue is less the utility involvement, but more the concept of long-term contracting, which would be, of course, ratepayers would pay for the cost of these contracts through rate base. And so it kind of gets us back to, this scenario before restructuring, where the cost of generation was being paid for through rate base. And so our concern is that this is, again, carving out segments of the markets, of the competitive markets, in favor of sort of hand-picked technologies, regardless of their merit. And I should add that NEPCA's position is not one of anti-wind. Far from it. We've got companies that invest in wind resources, among other things, including lots of different renewables. But it's more about the way in which the bill is proposing to develop those resources, whether it's for the clean energy attributes or to sort of kickstart a supply chain. We think that there are better ways, and namely doing that through the competitive markets. And again, I do want to point to the fact that we are in the midst of working on enhancements to the competitive markets to make those opportunities easier for the states. In other words, to bring the markets in better alignment with things like clean energy goals, or just frankly, the ability for states to rely more on the markets for the kinds of resources that they're looking for. That's something that's currently absent from the markets to some degree. And so we would just ask that the committee just sort of let that process play out, see what can be produced with respect to a market-based solution, rather than committing ratepayers to these 15 to 30-year long-term contracts.
Just one follow-up. You know, again, it's an interesting argument. I'd note two things that New Hampshire ratepayers have been hammered by winter peaks. It's been one of the huge drivers of costs, and that many of the contracts for offshore wind, New York, for example, has ensured that winter peak, and that's why it's in this bill, will be something that is dealt with in the contract so that our ratepayers won't be on the hook for billions of dollars of winter peak spiking because of this kind of procurement. And just, you know, one other kind of question too is that, you know, we know the industry's coming, right? And that this is the industry is coming, and wouldn't it be advantageous for New Hampshire if it can do something to ensure that the industry, because it's coming anyways, provides some advantages to the state?
Well, I guess I would say that certainly the industry is, you know, in your words, coming, but I still think there's time for New Hampshire to sort of look to what other states are doing and to consider whether that is the best course, even as it is considering ways in which to, you know, sort of prop up our supply chain and take advantage of the technology. And that's primarily why we say, let's look to a market-based solution for this, because in that kind of context, you're sort of leaving ratepayers from having to carry the burden. Particularly in a technology that is in its infancy here in the region in terms of offshore wind, and the fact that we need, you know, we sort of need to understand what we're asking of ratepayers when we're committing them to these kinds of long-term contracts. I mean, one of the things that we think about, for example, is the extent to which these technologies today that look very innovative over the course of 15 to 30 years become outdated. Meanwhile, ratepayers will have been committed to those contracts at a price that may, in hindsight, look quite high, particularly as prices come down and there's more development. We just need to be kind of cautious about that. I think a little humble about projections on pricing and the innovation opportunities.
Any other questions from the committee? I have just a couple. You had mentioned somehow that this will affect the my question is, how will this affect the wholesale market? I wrote that down as a question.
Sure. So when you've got resources like offshore wind that are receiving an out of market payment, in other words, the contracts afford these resources a payment that they're receiving, a revenue stream that they're receiving outside the markets. Then these resources can bid into the wholesale markets at a much lower price, and in fact, in the energy markets, they can bid in at zero as what we call price takers. And that has the effect of suppressing energy prices, which brings the prices down for everyone. But meanwhile, if you're a resource, a competitive merchant, you know, a competitive generator in the markets, and you're not receiving one of those out of market, you know, payment streams, then you're dependent on now a lower, you know, market price. But your expenses haven't gone away. You still need to be able to maintain the facilities that we all need for reliability and for these continued lower costs. And so that makes it very difficult for those existing generators to recoup those reasonable expenses. We worry about things like, you know, premature retirement. If the price formation, if their ability to recoup, you know, that revenue isn't.
We lost you. It isn't. You know, I could have swore I heard some wind earlier and it might have knocked me down. I don't know if any of you heard that, but I thought that is not planned here. Dan, are you still there? Dan, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
I can.
Oh, you did freeze for a second there.
Oh, it wasn't us.
Okay, it wasn't me either.
All right. We lost you at isn't.
Oh, okay. But all I was trying to say was that just very briefly, it's really about the suppressive effect of having resources that receive this out of market payment. The fact that it brings down energy prices, it makes it very difficult for those resources that don't receive those kinds of out of market revenues to compete. It just has a price distorting effect. And that's the primary issue for the folks that we represent in the marketplace.
And you're not against the wind at all. I mean, you like the idea of the options all above as far as energy suppliers. This isn't what your complaint is. It's how it affects the wholesale market and the cost of investment over a 30-year period, something to that effect.
Exactly. To be clear, we are not, in fact, we're technology agnostic in a way. We have members that represent, all different kinds of resources. So it's not about the technology itself.
So where in the bill would I find your concerns with the cost of investment for liability over the 30 years? Is there any place in the bill that I can reflects this?
So I'm referring to the provisions around the possibility for contracts between 15 and 30 years. And so those costs would be recovered from ratepayers through their utility bills.
Right. So would that be under their capital and expenditures? So they get like a good return on that stuff. Okay. Any other questions? Dan, I really appreciate your comments. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much.
And next.
Okay, next up we have Don Crease.
Welcome,
Good
Don.
afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Don Crease, and as you all know, I am New Hampshire's consumer advocate, and my job by statute is to represent the interests of residential utility customers at the PUC and everywhere else, including here. And I apologize for taking this long. I've gone this far into the session before I've had the opportunity to have live testimony before your committee. It's great to be with all of you, to say hello to those of you I already know, and to greet those of you who I haven't met yet. My only disappointment is that I would have expected by now that Chairman Avard would have found a way to set that opening peroration to music, since I know he has to read that every time he opens a hearing. And I know that he's a musician, and it would sound really great as a kind of a rock and roll riff, I guess.
They're probably not going to like you for mentioning that now. We could do that.
Yeah. Well, I've heard you perform in other settings, and so I know that would be just great. I would like to say that personally, I am a huge fan of wind power, and aware as I am that the Gulf of Maine is the Saudi Arabia of offshore wind-driven megawatts. I'm really excited to see the state take a serious look at offshore wind, and in general, I think wind power is something that our descendants are going to look back at us and admire us for, just the way we nostalgically look at lighthouses and old barns and think, wow, those people really built beautiful, excellent things and did the best they could. I think that's how our descendants are going to think of us in relation to the wind turbines that we see sprouting up around us. However, in my capacity as the designated statutory representative of residential customers and their interests as a group, I take no position on Senate Bill 151. I refer you to the written testimony that I've already circulated with the committee, and I just want to highlight 3 points here that I know you'll keep in mind, because to some degree you have already heard about them from other witnesses who have testified today. The first thing I want to say is that we are this year going to be celebrating the 25th anniversary of electric industry restructuring. And I think it's important to keep in mind what restructuring was really intended to do. And Mr. Collins from NEPCA did mention this. I think the central change that restructuring brought to New Hampshire was it took risk, business risk of generation investments not being economical, and lifted that risk off the backs of customers and put it onto the backs of investors who have an appetite for that kind of risk and who have an opportunity to reap a lot of reward by incurring that kind of risk. And so anytime there is an effort to take some of that risk and put it back on the shoulders of ratepayers, whether it has to do with a desire to reduce mercury emissions or whether we're talking about economic development in the northern forest by keeping biomass plants alive, or whether it's promoting the development of wind, or whether it's building natural gas pipeline capacity because we want the fuel security. I just feel obliged to point out to lawmakers that that should be done very carefully because you are walking back restructuring. Now, often it is necessary or appropriate to do that for public policy reasons, but it's important to do it knowingly, and it's important to remember where the only wallet in the room is, and that is in the back pocket of customers, including the residential ones I represent. The next point I want to make, and this was in my written testimony as well, is that there is a time-honored principle of utility regulatory law called used and useful. And the idea here is that really the only things that should be in your utility rates are costs that really are used and useful in the provision of the service you're actually buying. So this sort of mandatory ratepayer recovery of the cost of these long-term contracts violates the used and useful principle for a pretty simple and straightforward reason. You're talking about
Mr. Chris, I'm so sorry. I just want to warn you here, our 4-minute mark, so you have about a minute to wrap up here.
Great, I'm almost done. Wind power is not used and useful in the provision of distribution service, which is just poles and wires. So that's something to keep in mind. Finally, I am the only state official, I believe, who actually does claim to have a crystal ball. Most people say, well, I don't have a crystal ball. I do have one, but I am still ill-suited to make good prognostications looking ahead about whether one of these long-term contracts is truly in the long-term interests of the state and its ratepayers. And so therefore, if you do go ahead with this bill, I would ask you to remove me from the Renewable Energy Procurement Committee. My best and highest use as an advocate is in participating in whatever PUC proceedings are at the end of this particular rainbow. And frankly, I want the ability to critique whatever procurement decisions the Renewable Energy Procurement Committee makes and the utilities endorse and the governor embraces. And so I'm concerned about whether anybody has the ability to prognosticate accurately about long-term contracts, but I know for sure that I don't. And so that would be my specific request. With that, I recommend you read my written testimony, and even though it has no literary allusions in it this time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kreis. Senator Waters, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Donna. And I appreciate also the insights that our conversations on this bill have provided to me. And I did neglect to mention, members of the committee, that we do need to remove him from the REPC. I think I had erred on the side of inclusion there, and I think Don very rightly points out that that's not entirely appropriate to his role, because he gets to weigh in when things get over to the PUC. And Don, wouldn't it be fair to say that the courts have kind of taken some positions here that might be somewhat different from your interpretation of restructuring?
Well, if you read the New Hampshire Supreme Court's decision in appeal of Algonquin Gas Transmission, LLC, you'll see that there's a majority opinion and there's a dissenting opinion. And as between those two contrasting views of the Restructuring Act, I think Justice Hicks's dissent has the more incisive and accurate view of what the legislature intended when it adopted restructuring. But in the end, it's up to you to decide really what you think the purpose of restructuring really was and the extent to which you want to take a second look at whether restructuring is really the unimpeded policy direction that you want to go in. I mean, what the court said was, well, the purpose of restructuring is to keep rates as low as possible through competition. Well, the purpose of all utility regulation is to keep rates and costs as low as they possibly can be without violating the constitutional rights of the utility. So that let's have cheap electricity imperative has always been there. What changed about restructuring was the way to get there. And I think the way to get there was to take business risk off the backs of customers, especially residential utility customers.
Well, follow up, and thanks for that. But I just want to clarify for the committee that the courts tend to agree more with the position I'm taking on it. And I wrote the bill with that very, very carefully embedded here. And not so much a question, but just to comment on what Mr. Collins said and what Don has now said, that this issue of risk and who assumes it is exactly why in both the REPC and in the PUC deliberations and the ability of the governor to pull the plug, that evaluation of risk in terms of how it affects the contracts is central here, central. And with that, the burden that is potentially on the ratepayers. Nothing is certain in the future, but given the extraordinary costs that are now going to be associated with other sources of generated power, that it's important that the risks here be appreciated, understood, and that's why it's in the bill. Thank you, Don.
Thank you. I just want to say, since you mentioned that, Senator, this is a very, very well drafted piece of legislation. You and whoever helped you draft this legislation have done a really good job at making as clear as possible the need to make really good choices and assess the risks and the benefits as thoroughly as possible. I've been asked, is there anything else we could add to the bill that would make the bill more solicitous of the interests of ratepayers? And my answer to that question was no. I think this is a very well drafted piece of legislation, and I have no constitutional issues with it whatsoever. 3 years ago, I raised issues about the constitutionality of certain proposed mandatory payments to the wood burning power plants. I don't think there would be any constitutional impediments to adopting this particular piece of legislation.
Thank you.
I do have a question with regards to the 25th anniversary of restructuring, Don. In that, I'm thinking of, pardon me, a capital investment. If a utilities a supplier has a capital investment, they should basically assume the risk of participating in this, correct?
Well, I believe that Mr. Collins from NEPA got it right in response to the question that Senator Waters asked him. I mean, the actual investments here are made by companies that are not regulated utilities, right? I mean, I know Eversource is in the offshore wind business, but they're doing that through an unregulated subsidiary. So in that sense, this bill keeps with the spirit of restructuring by saying, look, we don't want our regulated utilities investing in generation anymore. That's the business of competitive firms. But as Mr. Collins also suggested, long-term contracts become the functional equivalent of investments because of the length of the commitment and the fact that they guarantee a revenue stream to those competitive firms that will allow them the business certainty they need in order to build the wind facilities that you want them to build. That's the whole purpose of doing something like this. So there is still a significant degree of business risk that ends up being placed on the shoulders of the ratepayers. Hope that was responsive to your question.
Yes, it was. Any other questions? Senator Waters.
Mr. Chairman, for indulging me, just because your question brought up another one that I didn't think of earlier when the issue about the duration of the contracts was raised, is that wouldn't it be fair to say, Don, that the proposition of layered contracts here helps to make sure that, since you're layering them in every few years, that if something has changed or the risk seems different or the price is better, that layering means that you aren't just, stuck forever in the first one, that you have the other ones coming along. So it's a kind of layering gives you a kind of constant process of judging the market and risks. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say, but if you're entering into a new 20-year contract every year or every couple of years, then you still deal with those full 20 years of commitments. But layering or staggering, that's always a good risk mitigation strategy for anybody who finds it necessary to make long-term financial commitments.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Seeing no further questions. Jen?
Okay, next up we have Kat Burke.
Thanks, Jenny. Can you all hear me?
We can. Welcome.
Wonderful. Thank you. For the record, my name is Kat Burke, and I'm the Director of Government Affairs for Unitil. Similar to the reasons that were enumerated by Eversource, Unitil is not taking a formal position on this bill, but we are here to provide any information we can and to answer any questions. To that extent, Jen, you should see Rob Farino on your list as well in the queue. Rob is our Director of Energy Contracts at Unitil, and he can certainly speak to the procurement process and offer any language suggestions, should that be of interest to the committee as well.
Great. Am I live now?
Oh, you are, yes.
Great, thank you. So this is Rob Farino with Unitil. I'm Director of our Energy Contracts Department. I wanted to take back and go back to some of the initial questions that I heard, and maybe try to fill in some of the gaps and address some of the dialogue that you've had today. So first question I got was, is procurement essential? And I would say yes, in the sense that these types of investments, I don't see them coming without contracts. And I do believe that a state-sponsored solicitation is a great way to get market interest. So yes, while, I think you heard that there's some onshore wind that's been contracted, just by the market, that I don't know that you would see that forthcoming in the offshore market. There's certainly a lot of precedent for state-sponsored contracts. As far as an opportunity for low cost, I think yes, low to moderate. The great thing about it is there's no fuel price risk, right? Once the facilities are up and running, I think one could expect the power, other than whether there's physical problems or transmission risk. So that's good. I think I heard 5 cents brought up earlier. I think it's public that the Mayflower wind contracts led to 7-cent power. And, maybe that gives you a benchmark for your thinking. I do think multi-state procurements for a small state like New Hampshire would make sense. We were involved in one multi-state procurement, which involved Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. It wasn't necessarily an easy process. There were trade-offs, in terms of schedule, allotment sizes, and things like that. I do think it would reduce evaluation burden and hopefully increase the market interest. Solicitation size, in terms of the overall targets, 600 to 800 megawatts, seems large for New Hampshire. When I look at it, it seems large for Unitil Energy Systems. If the state were to sponsor these contracts and we were to sign 600 to 800 megawatts of offshore wind, for example, our particular share would lead to covering 20 to 30% of our peak requirements, and 40 to close to 60% of our annual energy requirements. Now that's based on 2019 actual consumption of our customer base. So it's a pretty large piece. And when you talk about layering in small pieces, perhaps you're down to smaller procurements, which maybe again has us thinking about multi-state projects, particularly since you need some sort of, good size in order to cover the transmission cost over reasonably well. Timing, I'm not sure I fully understand. I do, because I've heard a lot about layering and 5 to 7 years into the future. I do think the June 2022 and June 2023 dates may be aggressive. I was happy to see remuneration in there, and glad to hear that the up to part of the up to 2.75 was addressed and maybe is understood. I do think that the legislature would want to be clear and, you know, whatever the number, pick a number, not leave it to argument, you know, the courts, for example, and so on. I do think that remuneration and a reconciling tariff are important to maintain the financial stability of the utilities. And really, you're going to be able to make these purchases due to the financial stability of the companies. I do think that's an area where credit analysts are looking for the policy of the state to support the contracts that they're going to see on the balance sheets. I do support the idea of an independent evaluator. I think that's very helpful. It leads to transparency, ideas from, you know, prior experience and experience in other jurisdictions. I think that's a very great strength. You know, as far as the discussion on, you know, undoing restructuring, and I'm not the lawyer, you know, on this in the room here, but you know, I would say that there's no assets or investment on the utilities part that's going to be rate based. And we try to structure contracts, at least in our experience so far, to really make them performance-based. So the performance-based kind of contract is structured where the utility, and therefore the utility's customers, are paying for the production. So regardless of what the investment was, if the facilities aren't producing kilowatt hours and megawatt hours, we're not paying. And so in that sense, the risk is really on the developer, right? So, and I do think that contracting, I don't know that this was covered in the bill, but that really contracts should be for the distribution companies should have a heavy hand in negotiating the contracts. I mean, we would be living with the contracts for 30 years and so on, 20 years, presumably it would be 20 years. But those are my general comments, and happy to take any questions.
Any questions from the committee? Senator Waters.
Yeah, thank you, Rob, and very helpful testimony. I really appreciate your being available today, and Kat as well. I just thought I'd revisit the last point about the size of the procurement. And I appreciate that. I think that I had put the bill together, that multi-state component, so that, you know, given your market or the other folks that you're in this with, that the amount of power can be distributed into those markets. You know, would it all come into New Hampshire? Well, probably not, especially since we're going to be, you know, this is an industry that's region wide, and just like now, I mean, we're getting power from sources through ISO that are coming from lots of places. But in terms of that, would you think then it might make the most sense then to just change this to up to 800 megawatts and be perhaps technology neutral? And it's the up to, it wouldn't maybe get us jammed up into trying to force utilities to buy too much in any one procurement?
That sounds helpful. I do think that, you know, that, for example, just to kind of talk the numbers, that like the 600 megawatts, for example, Unitil Energy Systems is 10% of the state, and we see it in the data, you know, on an annual basis. So we would say that's 60 megawatts that would come to Unitil Energy Systems. And, you know, last year we peaked out at 275, and so that's a pretty big percentage in one, you know, swoop, you know, if you will. Again, 30% relative to the 800 megawatts. Yeah, it is interesting, the existing renewable energy credits. You know, my notwithstanding the state's interest in wanting to support, you know, existing renewables, you know, it would seem like you know, customers have paid QF contracts over the years, and that it would be nice to be looking at new renewable contracts. But you know, that's just for whatever that's worth.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Thank you very much for your testimony. We appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Okay, next up we have Dr. Cynthia Walter. Dr. Walter, if you could unmute on your end.
Yes, I'm right here. Thank you. Yes, I didn't think I'd get so early. So I am just an ecology professor, so I'm not speaking for the fisheries industry. But I noticed in the bill that the word fisheries is mentioned several times. And while I agree that there's emphasis on the criteria for due diligence, as Senator Waters described, I see that in the bill itself, it states that the latest science will be used. But I don't see anything associated with, any phrase associated with, for example, communication with fishery industry stakeholders. Here's the issue. There's been some excellent new science coming out associated with stationary wind platforms. Off the coast of England, for example, where 10% of in one location, 10% of the lobster catch of the world is located. When they put in 35 wind turbines, a scientific study showed that these stationary platforms had no effect on that lobster catch for 6 years during installment and development and operations. And in fact, young lobsters were doing even better. So we have science saying, and from Europe and so on, and England, that these turbines can not impact the area. But the fishery group that was part of this was part of the planning and part of the scientific study. So there's good planning and good science possible for stationary platforms. However, if these platforms are the mobile ones, there won't be a lot of science even within the next few years because there just aren't enough platforms to do the science. So having communication as part of the criteria for establishing acceptability on the part of BOEM, acceptability on the part of the reviewers for the REPC, I think is its name, and the PUC, having that communication, having the fisheries people be part of the planning from the beginning of any considered plan, I think would be really helpful to keep them working collaboratively from now, because we've seen some articles come out, with some opposition, some hesitation already. We don't need this conflict if we can work together from the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Senator Waters.
Yeah, just because we're likely to hear from others, folks with these same concerns, and I thank you for it. I just wanted to mention that, BOEM, of course, does the major environmental and fisheries review and has participation there. But we have this offshore wind commission that has fishermen at the table, appointed by the governor, and they're at the table. And we can't regulate BOEM in this bill. But as a member of the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, I am acutely aware of these issues. And so that's why I wanted to at least build in here an acknowledgement that at the very earliest stages that we're going to ask that the developers have had a thorough consultation with the fishermen and with the available sciences when they bring a proposal into the REPC, because I agree with you, that is just essential. So thank you.
Very good. I'm glad to hear that the group has them in their group. I didn't see it on the website, but thank you. That's great. Thanks.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Okay, next up we have Heidi Kroll.
Welcome, Heidi.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Great, thank you. So for the record, my name is Heidi Kroll. I work at Gallagher, Callahan, and Gartrell, and I'm here today, this afternoon before you representing the Granite State Hydropower Association. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. GSHA is certainly in favor of policies that support the state's existing renewable resources, as well as the growth of new renewable resources. However, based on our review of SB 151, we do have a number of questions and concerns. And our suggestion respectfully is that if the legislature wants to implement a renewable energy procurement program, then the bill might benefit from a little bit of further work and stakeholder input. I did sign in neutral on SB 151. So some of our questions and concerns include the following. First, New Hampshire RPS eligible resources, including class 4 existing small scale hydro, are mentioned on page 1 in the definition section, and we certainly greatly appreciate Senator Waters including small scale hydro in the bill. But after that, it kind of feels like the bill is really geared more toward new large offshore wind projects, which obviously a lot of the discussion has been about so far this afternoon, and not really toward New Hampshire RPS eligible renewables, especially smaller existing resources. So one suggestion we have is that we feel there should be really be clear and separate solicitation and selection requirements for new renewable resources versus the existing resources. So that's one comment. In reviewing the bill, we think that the responsibilities and the decision-making authority of the different parties, the REPC, the governor, the distribution companies, and the PUC, what each would have in a procurement program should be clarified. So at least in our read of the bill, we found it a little confusing. We found that there was some lack of clarity in the bill about how the process would work. And which parties would have which rights and responsibilities at different points in the process. And I appreciate Senator Waters and I had a conversation last week, and he explained to me how he envisions the process being. And so I think it's just maybe that the words in the bill don't quite match that or reflect that in a really clear way. Another comment that we have is that there is, and I think Senator Waters mentioned this earlier, there is a specific carve out for offshore wind within the 600 to 800 megawatt solicitation, but there is not a specific requirement that within that solicitation, other New Hampshire RPS eligible renewables would be included, including class 4 existing small scale hydro. So our concern simply is that in theory, 0 megawatts of New Hampshire RPS eligible renewables might be solicited. Three other quick points. It's unclear to us how this solicitation would fit into the existing default energy service that New Hampshire distribution utilities currently offer. Another point is that in our opinion, the 2.75 annual payment to the utilities does not seem necessary or appropriate. And would only lead to an unwarranted increase in electricity costs. And finally, we just wonder whether a deadline of June 30th, 2022 for soliciting bids is achievable or whether more time was needed. So with that, those are my comments. Thank you very much for your time and consideration, and I'd be happy to try to answer any questions.
Heidi, what is this 2.75 annual? What is that?
Well, there's mention in the bill about an annual payment to the utilities. Senator Waters had explained to me that he thought it was maybe to kind of compensate them for their administrative cost. I think there's mention in there about the risk that the utilities would undertake. And, I just think in the rates that they already are collecting, part of their, I think, job is to do, contracting. And I think really the risk, if to the extent there is risk, falls on the ratepayers and not the utilities. So I just think it's something that needs to be further discussed because it certainly would increase electricity costs.
And for the public, could you explain a little bit what you mean, what your question about the default meant? What is default and how does that apply?
Yeah, it's simply the fact that, currently the utilities are on a schedule. I believe it's in every 6 months. They go out and procure default energy service, which is simply power for consumers that have not chosen to go with a third-party supplier or competitive supplier for their electricity. And so they go out for competitive bids. And so it's just not clear, maybe it is to others, but it wasn't, or it's not to us, how this solicitation would fit into that other solicitation process.
Okay, thank you. Senator Waters, do you have any questions? You're muted.
You think you really want to prompt me? Wouldn't there be maybe one person I didn't ask questions of, Mr. Chairman, and we get this done with? But you asked. No, Heidi, thank you. I appreciate our earlier conversations, and I think that many of these things are explainable, or it's a new process and they get worked out in the process. But the bottom line is that I am concerned about not having the small hydro left out. And I think there's some ways I've got some ideas about wiggling that. But did you hear what I said at the beginning about, after talking with David Shulock, that there would be a way to change the definitions of hydro at the beginning so that we are essentially excluding large importation from large hydro projects and therefore favoring the 2, 3, 4? I don't know if you heard my.
Yes, I did hear that, and I very much appreciate that. We certainly, a small scale hydro facility in New Hampshire that's, under 5 megawatts. And we have many that are even much smaller than that, are certainly a very different type of renewable facility compared to, a Canadian hydro. So we very much appreciate that. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions? Thank you, Heidi.
Okay, next up we have Amber Hewitt.
Welcome.
Thanks very much. Hi, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Good afternoon. I am joining you today on behalf of both the National Wildlife Federation and New Hampshire Audubon, our state affiliate. And I thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony on this bill, and in particular in support of the portions of this bill relating to offshore wind energy. We did submit detailed testimony in writing, so I'll just briefly summarize some of the highlights and try to stick to only those that haven't already been mentioned today. Our organizations strongly support the responsible development of offshore wind power, and we applaud this bill as an important step forward. We're eager to see New Hampshire seize the environmental and economic benefits that offshore wind power has to offer. We recognize that the timing of procurements laid out in SB 151, it ensures that any offshore wind development resulting from this legislation will occur in currently designated wind energy areas, almost certainly those off of southern New England. And while this bill will not result in turbine construction off of New Hampshire's coast, the design of New Hampshire's procurement process can significantly influence the details of any resulting projects, regardless of where they're constructed. We appreciate the included requirements for an environmental and fisheries mitigation plan and for a plan to negotiate project labor agreement. It's critical that development at the scale that offshore wind power has to offer is undertaken only with stringent wildlife protection measures in place, both offshore and onshore, and in a manner that provides economic opportunities to local communities and the workforce. So really urging all of you to recognize the power that exists in being the buyer. And while we can't necessarily regulate everything that happens in federal waters, there's a lot that can be said and done to ensure that any power that New Hampshire is party to buying is done in a way that lives up to an important set of values. I will just quickly note on earlier discussions around long-term contracts. I just want to make sure we're all recognizing that this is a 30-year-old booming industry. While it's new to us here in the United States, there are nearly 6,000 offshore wind turbines up and running around the world. Only 7 of them are in the United States. So we have so many lessons learned to draw from. The benefit of being that far behind is that we can enter this industry with advanced and incredibly low-cost technology. Your commenter cited the 7-cent price tag that came in with Mayflower's project in Massachusetts. That is right on par with the Vineyard Wind project also moving forward. in the South. So these price tags should be incredibly encouraging to all of us. The value that this resource has as something that's generating power strongly, consistently in winter cold snaps. The attention to winter peak here is incredibly important, and that this has an outsized, offshore wind power in general has an outsized opportunity to buffer ratepayers from the volatility of those winter price spikes, and that really but doesn't come with every renewable resource. So it's something that we really need to just recognize offshore wind power brings to the table in an incredibly valuable way. And that throughout this bill, as Senator Waters has noted, there is just immense opportunity to get out if it doesn't seem right. So if it's not cost effective, if it's not commercially reasonable, there are ample opportunities for the government to, as I think the language earlier was, to pull the plug. While it's important to consider all of the risk inherent here, there is a lot of opportunity to get out if the risk seems too high. But what we're seeing elsewhere in states that are really taking on offshore wind legislation and advancing toward seizing this opportunity is that the price is just constantly reaffirming that now is the time to get in the game in a way that is incredibly protective to and actually beneficial to ratepayers. Just a few more quick notes in summary. We do urge you to consider removing the 800 megawatt cap on procurement and to enable the Renewable Energy Procurement Committee to determine which submitted proposal, combination of proposals, is in the best interest of New Hampshire ratepayers. Just in case of the circumstance that there's a pleasant set of surprises in there, why cap at 800 megawatts? This industry is scaling up quickly. The efficiency of turbines, of each individual turbine, is growing quickly. And so let's just be ready to seize the benefits at the highest level possible. We do share the concern shared earlier in opposition to the 2.75% payment to distribution companies. Am I almost at time? I saw you unmute.
Yeah, sorry. Unfortunately, your time has expired.
Okay, well, we submitted written testimony in detail with regard to the Environment and Fisheries Mitigation Plan, which is where the majority of our comments were. So I wanted to make sure I hit the highlights outside of that. But thank you so much for your consideration. And we do look forward to working with all of you to bring the benefits of offshore wind power to the Granite State.
Thank you, Amber. I'm sure there'll be a question or two, and I do have one, and if you're willing to take it.
Please.
In the past, and listen, I really love the idea of this wind. I really do. I love the options of that it provides for us. But in the past, and I know it's real in some folks' minds, that there is somewhat of an impact environmentally with the birds. And onshore, there seems to, have an impact on predatory birds. And I know with some reps in the past having this discussion about that it did kill a lot of birds in onshore. So we don't want that to happen, but can you elaborate a little bit as far how safe this is for our flying friends, if you will?
Thanks so much. I appreciate the question. It's and those are the comments detailed in writing. So I'll just say briefly, because I want to be clear that the details really matter here. But in summary, the National Wildlife Federation, New Hampshire Audubon, we are only endorsing offshore projects that are done responsibly with stringent protections in place every step of the way. So what we believe is that, and fortunately, again, another benefit of being 30 years behind is that we have a lot of data to draw from. Not all of it is applicable here, but that the right monitoring provisions are in place so that most important, when it comes to birds, most importantly, we need to choose the right location. And so that, because we're going so far offshore wind development is now almost always more than 10 miles from shore. We can be careful to avoid critical migratory pathways. The risks do decline the further that we get from shore in the sense that activity is more predictable. And so we can ensure that the right location is chosen, which is why we and our partners in conservation are always at the table as BOEM is drawing lines on a map. Once that happens, then we negotiate directly with developers and work with regulators to make sure that the monitoring technology and science that applied is always changing. So we just are there at the table to say, this is what we're learning, this is what needs to be applied. And we have extensive detail with regard to not just birds, but frankly, we have a lot of concern about what the construction activity can do to marine wildlife. And we have endangered whales that migrate through these areas. And so while all large scale development has the potential to have an impact on marine and avian wildlife, we believe that the crisis of climate change calls on us to find the responsible path forward for large scale clean energy solutions. Offshore wind really stands out to us as something that we can take on responsibly, but I can't say enough how important it is that all of the details are in place. And we certainly have all of that at the ready for you if you're ready to dive into the details with us.
I really appreciate that. Senator Waters, did you have a question? No? Thank you very much, because those concerns are based on reality on
Yes.
the onshore, correct? So we just wanted to share that with some of our friends who are concerned with that. I really appreciate your testimony. Any other questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Amber.
Okay, next up we have Doug Bogan.
Doug, you're on.
Yes, my name is Doug Bogan. I'm director of Seacoast Anti-Pollution League that's based in Exeter. And I'd like to speak in support of SB 151. I've been working on encouraging offshore wind for about 10 years now. And of course, I'm very excited to see this come to this point. Throughout my professional life with Seacoast Anti-Pollution League and before that with Clean Water Action, I've documented pollution from fossil fuel and nuclear power sources in the state and pursued ways to reduce it. As part of that effort, we need to be creating new power sources, looking at cleaner sources of electric generation and energy generally. In the future, we'll need to maintain and likely expand electric power to run our economy, to heat our homes, and to transport people and products. In recent decades, conflicts and growing fuel scarcity around the world have shown the value of seeking local sources of energy and aiming for energy independence. With no indigenous fossil fuel sources, we send billions of dollars out of state every year to pay for our resources. For New Hampshire and for the New England region in general, the largest potential source of indigenous sustainable clean energy is offshore wind. A recent US Department of Energy study determined that tens of thousands of megawatts of economical wind power can be tapped off of our region's shores. Now, combined with other renewable sources, particularly solar and expanded electric storage capacity, offshore wind has the potential to give us energy independence if we choose to pursue it. New Hampshire once relied on mostly indigenous energy sources, wind, water, and biomass. In previous centuries, much of our industry was in maritime construction and transportation. New Hampshire was once so proud of that heritage that we put a ship under construction on our state seal and our state flag. And it just seems reasonable that we try to reclaim some of that heritage, some of that tradition. The longer we wait to take advantage, the further we'll fall behind in neighboring states. The need to kickstart this resource to have a chance at energy independence. This legislation provides a great start to this process, and I hope you will support it. Thank you for your time and attention to my thoughts.
Senator Gotti, can you take over just for a couple of minutes? And thank you for your testimony, Doug.
Certainly, thank you, Senator Averard. Any further questions of Mr. Bogan? Okay, hearing none. Who's next?
All right, so next we have Brett Charrington.
Brett, welcome to Energy and Natural Resources again.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the chair and the members for having me. I want to make clear that I'm representing myself, but as a bit of introduction, I live in Hillsborough. I am a past 18-year member of the Conservation Commission, part of that as chair, and I'm currently the chair of the Local Energy Commission. I'm also affiliated with Extinction Rebellion New Hampshire, and I have a degree from UNH in wildlife. So I am here to support SB 151, and with all of the experts that have preceded me, I feel a bit out of my normal realm, but I would like to just make the point that offshore wind and other sustainable energy sources are vital to a just clean energy transition. And we in New Hampshire need to do our part as a state to minimize the effect of the climate and ecological crisis, and to work with national and international communities towards that goal. I have read most of the bill, and I am not in agreement with everything. I have some issues with the biomass part of it, and but overall, we are way behind, as been stated, in working towards offshore wind, and that is something that I have long been a proponent of. So my general statement is that I am in favor. There's been a number of things that I've heard this morning that I question, and I as I said, I'm not an expert on this, and there's just a couple of things that I hit that I think I can speak to. One of which was one of the previous speakers was talking about the competitiveness of out of market effects with some of the procurement industries, and led me to believe he was making the point that it is unfair for sole producers of one technology as relative to the others. And I think, well, we have been subsidizing the fossil fuel industry in this country for decades and decades. And so, as far as fairness in competition, I think you really need to take an overall assessment of what the fairness is, and where various suppliers of energy are getting their funding, and how they have their competitive edge or not. So I also wanted to point out that I am very much in agreement with the blocking of large-scale hydro imports, and trying to stick with the small-scale in-state providers. I think that is an excellent thing. So as has been stated, we're 30 years behind, and with a 5 to 7 year construction horizon, we have no time to wait. We really need to address the climate and ecological crisis, and I think this is a great way to do so. I appreciate your time, and I'm willing to answer any questions you may have.
Are there any questions from members of the committee? We're hearing none. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Okay, next up we have Madeline Manel.
Madeline, welcome back.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on this bill. I'm Madeline Minot, the Executive Director of Clean Energy New Hampshire, and we support very much the concept of renewable energy procurement. We think it's an important option to encourage the development of new renewable generation, as well as support existing renewable generation in our state, while also allowing for prioritizing specific review or selection criteria that are important to us. Recent renewable energy procurement in New England have shown really competitive priced bids. For example, in Maine, there was a procurement recently that winning bids were a mix of solar, wind, hydro, and biomass, and the average winning price bid was 3.5 cents per kilowatt hour. However, as some of the other speakers mentioned, we do also have a few concerns, which I sent in my written testimony, but I will briefly go over now as well. In the bill, I'll say Clean Energy New Hampshire supports all types of renewable generation in our state, and both existing and wanting to encourage the development of new projects. And so we're trying to balance all of those mix of interests in our position on the bill. So we think that all technologies that qualify for our renewable portfolio standard should be eligible to participate in a clean energy procurement. In the bill as written, clean energy generation is divided up into a few categories, including new class 1 renewable portfolio standard resources, which is defined as offshore wind, and then new class 1 RPS eligible resources that must be firmed up with firm service hydro generation. We don't think that that's necessarily appropriate. There's actually baseload dispatchable renewable technologies that are eligible for class 1 RPS. And so it wouldn't make sense to require that those be backed up by another form of generation. So we think that class 1 eligible, both existing and new, should be allowed to participate in their own right. And we recognize that there might be a need to do separate procurements for existing resources and new resources with different eligibility or review or selection criteria appropriate for those. We also share the concern that there must be no less than 600 megawatts of offshore wind procured, but the other 200 megawatts for the other technologies is optional. So I agree that having the whole bucket be technology neutral, or having a separate procurement for the other technologies that's more certain would be good. We are also opposed to requiring annual payment to the utilities for agreeing to enter into the contracts. I don't think that that should be necessary. We do have some concerns about some of the wording regarding guaranteed energy delivery in winter months, or hydroelectric generation provided without interruption, for example. Regardless of the generation technology, even fossil, nuclear, clean, renewable, whatever it is, there are generation interruptions that happen that are beyond the control of the generator because of extreme weather or equipment failure or interconnection failure. And so we just want to make sure that the requirements are reasonable and make allowances for such circumstances. And we just want to make sure, I mean, I am reassured by Senator Waters' introduction saying that the goal really is to favor local generation and not to favor new projects that are far away that would require significant new transmission expenses, and that the transmission expenses should be considered, because obviously we want to make sure that there's a clear direct benefit to New Hampshire, and we would like to favor in-state resources. Finally, I'll just say a couple of times there's the words cost effective are used and sometimes low cost are used. And to us, cost effective is a very clear metric and objective and can be determined with a cost benefit analysis, but that's not necessarily synonymous with low cost, which is more subjective. And so we would prefer that the ultimate goal is something that's cost effective for ratepayers. I'll stop there and happy to take any questions.
Senator Avard, you would like to take the helm?
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator Gaida.
You're welcome.
Madeline, thank you very much for your testimony. You were filled with wisdom.
Thank you.
And Senator Waters, do you have anything to ask yet? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. And Madeline, thanks as always for your contributions. And I haven't had a chance to look at your testimony yet, but do you have any specific language suggestions in there related to your objections or concerns?
I didn't write specific suggestions. I'm happy to work with you on that. Some of it is just, as I said, just making it more open as far as what technologies qualify and not necessarily requiring the backup. So how the eligible technologies are defined is certainly something we would like to work on. And as other folks mentioned, yeah, I don't know how detailed we want to get into how to open up the the whole procurement to be being technology neutral, or making the additional procurement for the other renewable technologies to be more specific, but I'm sure we could find something like that. Regarding not having guaranteed delivery or generation without interruption, I think we could come up with some language regarding the performance of the generator being considered as part of the review, or guaranteed a certain amount of delivery without interruption, something like that.
Well, if I may, Mr. Chairman, just to follow up, I suspect we're going to be executing this on Wednesday. I think we have to. So that if you have some thoughts and language, and this, for anybody else who's listening, that would be most helpful to come. Those would come to me directly. And I think, Madeline, that what I'm hearing is that just maybe technology neutral in the 800, and then maybe clarify a little bit. I mean, I got to take care of the big hydro, but clarify a little bit in the selection process that we really do mean to be inclusive in the packages that are put together. And then I don't see, in some ways, I don't know if you'd agree with this, so I can make a question, but I think that this process trusts the process in a certain way, and without being exactly specific to the REPC and to the PUC, makes pretty clear. And since the governor is going to be able to evaluate each of these contracts or proposals, that that the concerns about making sure that there's potential inclusion of these other sources is what I've kind of more trusted to the process. But I think we could make some language changes. So wouldn't that be the way to go, to make it a question?
Yes, we could. I think we could do that. I think my concern is that because certain classes of the renewable portfolio standard are used as the qualifying technologies, there are, for example, biomass in class 3 and class 1. There's small hydro is almost entirely in class 4, but there's some that have added generation and actually qualify into class 1. And so just making sure that that's really clear, that these are the technology, any technology that qualifies for the renewable portfolio standard could be considered, for example.
Thank you.
Madeline, it seems like there's a lot of agreement about the 2.75% fee, whatever. That might be something that we can take up into consideration. But do you believe that in the cap, or should we just let it go, let it ride up to 800 megawatts? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I know that for offshore wind, the procurement has to be significant to generate interest, because it is, we're talking about really large projects and very large investments. And so they might not be interested if the procurement's not guaranteed to be a minimum size that's big enough to attract interest. I can't say what that minimum size is to really attract the interest, but I know it has to be significant. Regarding the other resources, I think there could be some flexibility left to the commission or the new Department of Energy, or all the entities that'll be involved in designing the procurement and participating in the rulemaking. I think flexibility is good, but I also think that if the goal is to guarantee some sort of economic stimulus in this industry, that there should be a minimum sort of guaranteed, so that we know that that's what's coming.
Heidi brought up some concerns about default. Do you have any comments on that?
About
default, what
the effect on default service?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not clear to me exactly the interaction. I mean, other states have done these, and so I think the idea is to mix it into the default service, but it's not clear to me if it would be completely separate, or if the utility would then ask their default service provider to blend this into their offering. So it might be a good idea to clarify that.
And you have a concern that our local generation you don't want that to be in jeopardy, correct?
Correct. We think we definitely want to support both our existing local generation and encourage new development.
We really appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions, Senator Waters?
Yeah, just one quick one to follow up on you, Senator Avard. So this isn't the only bite at the apple for New Hampshire, right? And isn't it the case that Massachusetts, for example, started out at 1,600 and then doubled it to 3,200, so that if things go really well in a few years, wouldn't it be possible for the legislature to come back and make an additional procurement?
Absolutely. Many states, not just Massachusetts, but many states that have started with one procurement have been very happy with the results and then decided to double down and increase and do a second procurement or increase the capacity that they're looking for.
Yeah, and isn't it the case that New York is now up to 5,600 megawatts? Right?
Yes. Yeah, it's very impressive, the capacity of some of these procurements that some of our neighboring Northeast states are doing.
So are you going to draft some language for Senator Waters as necessary?
Yeah, I will certainly send some specific recommendations regarding our comments. Yes.
Yeah, and if Heidi's still listening, the same with Heidi. If Heidi could draft some wording as well, because we are going to exec this Wednesday. Who else is listening? Who else testified? Dan. Yeah. So if we're going to exec this on Wednesday, we should have as many options as available to help this along, or or does it need extra work? But we'll determine that on Wednesday. But Madeline, that's it. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And next up, we have David Creer.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for letting me testify this afternoon. My name is David Creer. I am Director of Public Policy at the Business and Industry Association of New Hampshire. We are neutral on the bill. We are, supportive of any technology that would add reliability at a good cost to keep costs low. Our only concern is the language that says provided that reasonable proposals have been received. And the issue being that reasonable is subjective depending on the decision maker. For instance, reasonable could mean an RFP that does not increase costs to ratepayers at all, or it could mean, well, it's the least expensive out of the proposals we've received. So our only suggestion would be to maybe use something more concrete or define reasonable within the bill itself. That was all we had to say, pretty short today. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Senator Waters.
Just a quick one, Mr. Creer. Thank you for being here, but you're not in any way suggesting that the governor might be unreasonable, are you?
That is not what I am suggesting at all.
Okay, well, put that in the record. No further questions? All right, well, we're moving right along here. Sounds good. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And next.
Next up, we have Nick Karkoff.
Yeah, it's actually Nick Krakoff, but good afternoon, Honorable Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Nick Krakoff. I'm testifying today on behalf of the Conservation Law Foundation. For those of you who don't know us, CLF is a nonprofit environmental advocacy organization working in New Hampshire and across the region for healthy communities and a healthy environment, including advancing sound clean energy policies. CLF is a strong proponent of responsible offshore wind development, and therefore CLF strongly supports the offshore wind components in SB 151 and the inclusion of its ambitious offshore wind procurement of 600 megawatts. Responsible offshore wind development is needed to reduce pollution from fossil fuel generated power, which contribute to or worsen asthma and other respiratory problems. Increased renewable energy production, and particularly offshore wind, is also necessary to address the impacts from climate change that New Hampshire is already experiencing, including increased coastal flooding, severe heat waves, and mild winters. By mandating procurements of offshore wind, this bill would encourage New Hampshire to reduce its reliance on fossil fuel generated electricity, which is the leading cause of climate change. The offshore wind components of the bill would also be good for New Hampshire's economy and workers. The American Wind Energy Association estimates that between 20,000 to 30,000 megawatts of offshore wind capacity will be operational on the East Coast of the United States by 2030, representing between $28 billion and $57 billion of investment in the U.S. economy. According to the AWEA, Under a high build-out and high domestic manufacturing scenario, offshore wind could support up to 83,000 jobs annually in the United States by 2030. If New Hampshire's electric distribution companies were to procure offshore wind generation for a project in the Gulf of Maine, they would likely create thousands of good-paying construction, maintenance, and port-related jobs in New Hampshire and result in significant investment in the Port of Portsmouth. While CLF supports the offshore wind items in the bill, due to the non-renewable attributes of biomass, CLF opposes the possibility for biomass procurements that are included under the bill. Specifically, biomass results in net CO2 and particulate matter emissions, and it can take decades or even a century for replacement forests to remove the CO2 emitted from biomass plants. Additionally, the bill as currently written could result in biomass procurements from out of state, including the proposed Palmer biomass plant in Springfield, Massachusetts, which would result in a new source of pollutants and environmental justice and marginalized communities of Springfield. In sum, while CLF supports the offshore wind procurements in the bill, because we oppose the inclusion of biomass procurements, our position on this bill is neutral. Accordingly, CLF recommends that the bill be amended so it does not include the possibility of biomass procurements. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Is there any questions from the committee? All right, seeing none. Thank you very much. Jen?
Okay, next up we have Mike Kaplan.
Hello, and thank you, Chairman Abard, and to the committee for the opportunity to speak today. We provided additional written testimony, but appreciate the open approach to this process and the opportunity now. Olivewood is a developer of solar and energy storage projects and is working with communities throughout New Hampshire. We applaud the efforts to create more options for New Hampshire to develop and maintain cost-effective, responsible resources, and the broader initiative to utilize responsibly developed offshore wind resources. We do see that it is possible in New Hampshire to develop renewable energy projects in a manner consistent with other objectives, such as maintaining the character of communities and the environment. Since 2018, we've been working with a number of communities throughout New Hampshire on these projects. And one of the most common questions we receive is whether the energy from a project will stay in New Hampshire and benefit the local ratepayers. Historically, there haven't been as many tools for that in New Hampshire as in some of the neighbors. And so we support this effort to create such a tool. We do see some changes that we believe would enhance opportunities for ratepayer protection, as well as to create additional benefits, direct economic benefits to the state of New Hampshire. Some of those would be consistent with some of the other speakers, a bit more of an all-the-above approach to resources that could participate. This would foster more competition between those different energy projects to help support lower pricing. We would also say that the direct economic benefits to New Hampshire, that there's an opportunity to make that a specific and quantified part of an evaluation process. That can be done simply, and there are a number of examples of that in neighboring states that could be used as opportunities to see what's worked and what hasn't. Those direct economic benefits can become obligations on a project. If they don't happen, there's a consequence. We also see long-term contracting as a tool that's consistent with competition and managing risk. It's not that long-term contracting is good or bad. The question is really how much. A family wouldn't go into retirement with all of their savings in stocks. They'll look at what's the right amount of stocks versus bonds. And long-term contracts would be a bit like the bond and creates a chance to get a lower energy cost from each of the projects and to lock in a price. Just as prices can go down, prices can go up. And so the question is likely, what's the right amount that's the responsible amount for New Hampshire? And how does New Hampshire not try and time the market and perhaps spread out RFPs through a transparent multi-year schedule, which would likely lead to more projects competing because the presence of a schedule of RFPs will lead to more projects, more project developers pursuing an area. Another thing that we think would be an important ratepayer protection is to have any delivery or settlement of power be in New Hampshire. A project can be anywhere, but the New Hampshire ratepayers should not bear the risk of a difference in value between where New Hampshire's buying the power and New Hampshire's energy costs. So we see solar as one competitor, and what we would look for is just the opportunity for these projects to compete. As was mentioned by Madeline Minot and earlier, in Maine in 2020, there was an RFP with an average price in around 3.5 cents. Even with annual escalation in those agreements, after 20 years, they would be below the current residential supply prices in New Hampshire. Now, obviously, prices can move up and down, and it comes back to the question of what's the right amount. We see this process as an opportunity for New Hampshire to have options, not necessarily obligations. Opportunity to lay out a schedule for RFPs, for projects to compete, and if the cost-effective projects are identified, then for New Hampshire to pick that quantity that makes sense. I would add one piece to the cost-effective discussion, in that it is really about both the cost and the benefits. It's the value of the product, not just how much it costs. Paying $2 for something that's worth $1 is not something we'd prefer over paying $3 for something worth 10. So it's really about looking at the value of the products from all these competing projects. And we think that that is likely done best by using a universal set of requirements across all the technologies and seeing what each party can do. We really appreciate—
Mr. Kaplan, so sorry, but your time has expired.
Okay, I was just going to say thank you and be happy to answer any questions.
Michael, thank you for your testimony. Is there any areas that or languages that either cause you heartburn or you would like to maybe tweak in this bill that might make it a better bill?
We do have some areas, and if it's helpful, we could provide some written proposals for consideration. They would revolve around those themes of ensuring that all technologies can compete, and that the criteria for selection are even more transparent, and that local benefits are more explicitly recognized. And as was said by Madeline Minot, we see local benefits as a tool for the state to decide how to manage the retention of existing resources as well as the development of new resources.
Criteria for selection in procurement?
That's right. So for instance, the main RFP in 2020 and the one that's ongoing now, they use an approach that is 70% based on price, 30% based on direct economic benefits in Maine. And there's a weighted score, and projects are selected based on how they meet those two criteria. So New York has done a variation on that, where they have 70% price and 10% is economic benefits, 20% is other. It can be simple. It can foster or encourage projects to provide local benefits. It seems like it's in the best interest of both ratepayers as well as the broader community.
Questions from the committee? All right. Michael, thank you very much for your testimony. We appreciate it. If you have some language that you'd like to propose, you can get it to us before Wednesday. We would appreciate that.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Jen?
Okay, next up we have Lucas Meyer.
Welcome, Lucas.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you very much. For the record, my name is Lucas Meyer. I'm here testifying just as a Granite Stater. And given the incredible quality of testimony given, I'll try and be brief here. But just wanted to touch upon a personal experience, a personal professional experience, I should say. In October of 2018, I had the great opportunity to go to Denmark with a trade delegation from New Hampshire, a number of clean energy folks and some business interests, as well as Ambassador Sweat, to get a better understanding of the offshore wind industry, to hear from the Danish government, as well as their NGOs in the country, and from some of the companies operating in Europe. The one thing that was crystal clear was that there was great investment and prioritization by their elected leaders, by the government in Europe, to make sure the offshore wind industry was thriving. And SB 151 is absolutely critical in creating the needed processes to move forward with what will be an enormous economic opportunity for our state, whilst also making sure we're building a clean energy economy for the future. So I just wanted to say that everyone's work and diligence on this bill is greatly appreciated. I see great opportunity both in creating a clean energy future, but also the ability to attract and retain a younger workforce here in New Hampshire and New England, and would encourage the committee to pass this bill so we can begin important work to establish New Hampshire as an offshore wind leader in the region. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Is there any questions from the committee? Seeing none. Jen?
Okay, next up we have Fred Ward, but I don't see his name on our list. So Mr. Ward, if you could raise your hand, or if you're calling in by phone, press *9. Not seeing anything. And then next after that, we have a Teresa Picard. Ms. Picard, I don't see you on the list, so if you could raise your hand or raise it virtually on your phone by pressing *9. And then we have one individual with their hand raised under the title of owner. So we'll let that individual in. If you could just identify yourself for the record, please.
You're muted, owner. You are now unmuted, owner. Are you there?
Is anybody, can I be heard now? This
Yes,
is Fred Ward. This
Hi,
is Fred Ward. Am I on?
You are the owner.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a quick item. I'm a professional meteorologist, have been for years. Fred Ward, I live in Stoddard. I would speak for all meteorologists, all weathermen, and just comment with a little smile. When you use reliable and you're talking about weather-driven energy sources, there's sort of a conflict there. And I would suggest that you not use the word reliable when you're talking about weather-driven energy. That's wind, solar, hydro. Okay, based on my past experience with similar type projects, it's imperative that there be technically qualified members on the REPC, members from outside the state bureaucracy. Now, considering the wide scope of SB 151, it's crucial that these members have wide and deep experience in meteorology and astronomy and have lots of experience in dealing with large databases. We are now in the second decade of discussions over the huge windmills in the town of Antrim. The first hearings on this facility were 12 years ago, and the very same technical arguments are still raging, but are now centered on post-construction issues, yet very similar to those issues from 12 years ago. These continuing disagreements are the direct result of the way RSA 162H set up the Site Evaluation Committee. The SEC have lots of bureaucrats and lots of lawyers, but nary a whiff of technical expertise. The result of this? A long list of technical issues which were not and could not be addressed by any member of the SEC. SB 151, as currently written, is similar to 162H and will lead inevitably to 10 years or more of unsettled argument. The proposed REPC needs amendments, and I have sent you one in writing, requiring members with strong technical backgrounds in meteorology and allied fields and long experience in the analysis of large data sets. There were no such experts offered in the months of answered wind hearings by either the appellant or by any SEC member, all who were heads of state agencies. None. Since the proposed REPC will be even more dependent on even more technical expertise, it needs at least 2 highly qualified technical members outside the state bureaucracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fred, for your testimony. Is there any questions from the committee? Senator Waters.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ward. And not to simply say that offshore and onshore wind are apples and oranges, I will ask that are you aware that the REPC is dealing with procurement, not siting, constructing, permitting, that is under the auspices of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, which is fully technically staffed. So I just wanted to make sure you're aware of that.
I am aware of that. And in the SB 151 thing, it's talking about setting up a new commission. And I'm speaking to that as well.
Yeah, by the way, we do have an offshore wind commission, and you're welcome to attend its meetings where we are receiving that technical information. So lots of moving parts here, but I appreciate your testimony. Thank you.
I would love an invite. Thank you.
I think you just got invited.
I have to know the date and time, though.
Okay.
In the calendar, week from next Monday.
Thank you.
Brett, thank you for your testimony. Jen, you got this glow about you today. What is up with that?
Thank you, Senator. Just the light is shining upon us today. Next up, we've got Jason Stock.
Jason, how are you?
Good afternoon. I'm good. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I won't take up a lot of your time, but I appreciate the opportunity to say just a couple words on Senate Bill 151. For the record, my name is Jason Stock. I'm the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Timberland Owners Association, and we represent timberland owners and the forest products industry. And as a state, as the second most forested state in the nation, biomass power has been I should say, a significant part of our forest products industry, and also part of the state's renewable energy industry. And so for that reason, I just wanted to, I've been listening to the testimony, I just wanted to kind of weigh in and kind of agree with Heidi and Madeline in their comments regarding the intent of the bill, and just advocate, for the clarity that, existing New Hampshire RPS eligible resources, which would include biomass, that clarity is in the bill. I think that's clearly the sponsor's intent. That's what I'm hearing. And I just wanted to echo what Heidi and Madeline said, and just note that, biomass energy is a base load power, which is, a real asset. And it is, you can't get much more homegrown than trees and biomass in the state of New Hampshire. So for those reasons, I just wanted to weigh in and support the bill, the intent of the bill, and echo what Heidi and Madeline had said. So with that, I'll conclude my comments and be happy to hopefully answer any questions. Thank you.
Any questions from the committee? Just a clarification, Jason, just so that we protect that which is homegrown is what you're saying.
Yes.
And I think Senator Waters is in favor of that as well.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Further questions?
Alrighty, Senator, if we're good, we're gonna move on next to Dan Weeks. And if anybody else is looking to testify on this bill, if you could please raise your hand. Mr. Weeks is the last person I have with a hand up.
Thank you so much. Dan Weeks here from Revision Energy. We're New Hampshire's largest clean energy company and an employee-owned B Corporation. I'm also an active member of New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility, which convened over 130 New Hampshire businesses, including leading manufacturers and the state's largest employer, Dartmouth-Hitchcock, in support of the clean energy principles over the last 2 years. So broad support for the measures proposed in this bill. First, I'd just like to second the consumer advocate's earlier motion that the chairman turned that opening sequence into a rock and roll ballad. I'm also a Nashville resident, so well aware of Senator Avard's musical talents. In all seriousness.
Well, he plays keyboard. We got a band here.
Great. I play in my church band, so if you need some keys, happy to join in. In any case, Revision Energy, to be clear, is not involved in wind or hydro or other clean energies. Our focus is on solar. But we are committed, based on our mission as employee-owned company, towards seeing the wholesale clean energy transition take place in accordance with the best climate science to protect our health, our quality of life, our economy here in New Hampshire. And we do see wind in particular, offshore wind, as well as hydro as key complements to solar in that transition. So fully support SB 151. Just to put this 600 megawatts of offshore wind and 800 megawatts of total renewable energy procurement into perspective, as I'm sure the committee knows, the largest in-state single generator today is the Seabrook Nuclear Power Station, which is actually twice that at 1,600 megawatts. So in my opinion, this proposed procurement is, if anything, on the small side and hopefully a harbinger of much larger offshore wind procurements to come. This has been mentioned by previous testimony. I'll be very brief, but I do think it's important to point out once again that over the past century, traditional fossil fuel generation has benefited from trillions of dollars in direct and indirect government subsidies, including still today tens of billions of dollars in direct tax subsidies and other subsidies. And we can be thankful to fossil fuels for in many ways giving us the modern world that we enjoy. But it is crucial that we keep that perspective and that we follow the science in making this transition. I'd say that if scientists hadn't already put an urgent timeline on reducing carbon pollution by transitioning to clean energy, and if hundreds of New Hampshire residents weren't already suffering the effects and even dying prematurely from the fine particulate pollution that occurs when we burn fossil fuels from our tailpipes and smokestacks, then if that wasn't the case, it would make sense to take a more hands-off approach and let offshore wind develop gradually as it might otherwise do. But the reality is that New Hampshire is already experiencing profound effects. Our winter temperatures have risen almost 6 degrees Fahrenheit in my own lifetime, leading to spiking Lyme disease, stressed maple trees, mass dying of our moose population here, not to mention a raft of negative economic impacts. And I apologize, this hearing went long, so I have the kids in the background. Just to wrap up, I do want to just stress that point about the price we're paying today for not making this transition, with lowest in the Northeast rates of clean energy deployment so far. The International Monetary Fund released a study in 2019, which puts the cost of fossil fuel subsidies at more than $2,000 per New Hampshire resident per year. Their study covered the entire US, and on a per capita basis it's $2,028 per New Hampshire resident. That's 2.6 billion statewide per year, or 3.6% of GDP. That is a staggering cost that we are currently paying for not making this transition. And if we're going to see New Hampshire participate in the enormous economic benefits that are coming to this region up and down the eastern seaboard, where these procurements are already well underway, we need to recognize that some state action will be necessary, and that the cost will in fact be to all of our benefit. So finally, it's coming. We know it's coming. The procurements have already happened in neighboring states, and I think this bill is our opportunity in New Hampshire to participate in this future booming economy that I have no doubt will be a major economic driver for the broader region, to make sure that we here in New Hampshire, our economy and our environment benefit. So thanks so much for your time, and happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you.
And with that, anybody else wanting to testify, comment?
I don't see anyone with their hands up, Senator.
Okay, so let's close the hearing. And do I have a yeah? Do I have a motion to move into exec?
So moved.
Who moved that?
Waters.
Senator Waters moved and seconded by Senator Gray. All in favor? We have to take a roll call. So let's start with Senator Gray. Senator Gray. You are muted.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Senator Waters.
Yep.
Senator Perkins-Broka.
Yes.
Senator Gaida.
Yes.
Senator Avard, yes. So I think the first one to look at would be 91. Is that the one? 91. Discussion.
Chairman, I just want to reiterate that I filed a declaration of intent with respect to this bill, but I will be participating.
So, duly noted.
Thank you.
Do you have any comments on the bill?
Mr. Chairman, if I may just say what's happened here.
Yep.
You're booting my computer while you talk.
Yeah, and this will maybe take a comment from Griffin. What in part one, what we did was a couple wiggles of definition to try to ensure that battery storage is not energy generation, and that's the key to that.
I'm sorry, Senator, if I might, I just want to clarify the committee that there are a lot of amendments here on Senate Bill 91 in the share drive. What we're looking at is Amendment 0697S, if that helps. Again, 0697S.
I don't think I have that version. Well, I'm going to go ahead anyways and just you'll correct me, Griffin. And also in this part, that's a little bit later on with the aggregation.
Senator, which amendment then are you on?
Yeah, well, I'll back up to that, but sorry.
No, we're good.
I guess my question is, Griffin, when we get to the aggregation part, you're ready with the final wiggle that we got from.
I have the amendment that, yeah, we're good.
Yeah, Chairman Vose on 315 on the aggregation came up with some final language this morning, and what we wanted to be able to do was to incorporate that so that it's the same as what the House has decided to do about that. So I am now going to get it open. And what's the number of it again?
I believe the number of Representative Vose's amendment is 0664H, and that should also be available in the OneDrive for Senate Bill 91.
All right, and we're going with the 97, you said, 697?
697 is the latest and greatest amendment for all of Senate Bill 91.
All right, just one more second, sorry. This has been a lot of moving parts, folks. These omnibuses are, I'm pulling out what remaining hair I have on these.
All right, so for the chair's admonition, which amendment are we working on right now?
Right now, we're on 697.
Hold on.
Just there, and I cleared out of it. Now I'm back.
All right.
And this is the one size fits all?
Yeah, this has everything except we're going to add what the Vose has. And so on part one, just a couple little language wiggles and definitions of energy storage. And, I've been working with the utilities. I think this is where everybody, we had in the hearing, I think this is where everybody wanted to be on that one. Really no change to part two, right, Griffin? That's Senator Bradley's?
That's correct.
And then part three, Senator Perkins Coker, do you want to speak to that? I think it's we're the
Line 6, page 2.
I don't think we changed anything.
No, what we did was, Senator Perkins Quokka, apologies for catching you off guard. You had drafted an amendment 0475S that dealt with low to moderate income community solar projects. For the sake of consistency, what we did was we just took that amendment as you drafted it and slapped it into here, into Waters' amendment.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Great to know. Okay, so I am happy to speak to that. Essentially, there was one sentence at the end of my bill that the PUC had raised a concern about enforcing. They just needed some clarity. So the language that I proposed in 0475S was modified and approved by both the PUC and other advocacy groups that I was working with. So I believe it's to everyone's satisfaction now.
So that should be good to go. And then part 4, no changes in this version. It's just Bradley's, what we had before, and everybody was good to go with, right?
Yeah, I think part 4 was stuff that I think a lot of stuff that maybe Clifton Below spoke to, but I believe it's primed by Senator Bradley.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we're good on that. And then 5 is where the biggest changes are, because we essentially took the 2 aggregation sections of the original bill and replaced them with the VOS language. And so what this tries to do, and again, I just a real tribute to Chairman Vos and Cliff Below and the utilities for pulling a rabbit out of the hat over there in the house on 315, which I bet everybody's been hearing about, but they really, this is good work. And so it seemed important to have it, because we're working on the same thing, to have what they had already approved in here. So we have it in both versions, but we will, in the final committee amendment, need to include that last little changes and things that Vos caught at the last minute this morning. Is that fair enough, Griffin?
Yeah. So we're just going to add what now? Just Vos. We're going to add more language from Vos.
So give me just 1 second. So just to be clear, the language that Senator Waters was referring to, Chairman Vos had caught some grammatical errors in his amendment to House Bill 315. He corrected those with OLS in a subsequent amendment. That amendment is in everybody's share drive for Senate Bill 91. It's 0664H. And based on my understanding, it doesn't change anything significantly. It just makes those grammatical changes.
All right. So with regards to this amendment, though, do I have any discussion?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would think what we'd be doing is just saying that we're going to incorporate that new Vos amendment into this, so that we end up voting on one amendment, a committee amendment.
All right. Sounds like a plan. So
I would move 0697.
Senator Water moves.
Second.
Seconded by Senator Gaida. Discussion.
So understanding that when we vote, we're voting for a version that includes the Vos amendment. That good, Griffin, for you?
That works for me. So just a committee amendment. We're adopting 0697S as is, with the condition that part 5 is amended with Representative Vos's 0664H.
Is everybody okay with that? Let's take the roll. Senator Waters.
Yes.
Senator Gaida.
Yes.
Senator Gray.
Yes.
Senator Perkins Quokka.
Yes.
Senator Avard, yes. All right, so the amendment has been adopted. Is there a further motion?
Consent? No, got to do the bill first. I'm sorry. Getting ahead of myself.
We can go to the bill now. Is there a motion for not to pass?
Ought to pass as amended.
Second.
Gaida, and further discussion? Seeing none, Senator Waters.
Yep.
Senator Gaida.
Yes.
Senator Gray.
Yes.
Senator Perkins Quokka.
Yes.
Senator Avard, yes. Is there a motion to move to consent?
Consent.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Senator Waters, third by Senator Gray. So let's take a vote. Senator Gaida,
Yes.
Senator Waters,
Yep.
Senator Gray,
Yes.
Perkins Quokka,
Yes.
Senator Avard, yes. Who would like to take this out?
Senator Waters would love to take it out.
I'm the prime, so I might as well. Committee members, and I thankfully it's on consent because then the whole Senate doesn't have to listen, blither and blather about, I mean, really, I just, so much of this is so beyond me, but it's on consent. I'm good to go.
I really thank you for your hard work.
Bill.
Yeah. So, discussion on SB 51, lobsters.
Slow down.
So we got the B-52 singing this one. Okay, they sing the Rock Lobster song. If you don't know,
I'll move on to pass on the amendment. 681S.
Is okay. Seconded by anybody?
I'll second it for discussion.
Seconded by Senator Gray for discussion.
All right, so I feel like I've been dropped in a pot of hot water and my tail has been flapping a little as I'm trying to do this thing, and just so much conversation and discussion. Thank you to Paul Sanderson and Cherie Patterson. This required a lot of research about Maine and Massachusetts, and Henry Velu too, and the sponsor, Senator Ricciardi. I mean, wrangle. And by goodness, I really think we got to something that is, makes the sponsor happy, makes the restaurant association happy, does not, as far as I can tell, violate our interstate compacts. And I've shared it with Fish and Game and with Paul Sanderson, and I just saw an email from him, said he's available for questions. But I think we got to where Senator Ricciardi hoped that we would, and I guess pulled it out of the hot water or something. But serve it up with butter. I think we did it, folks, and I think it just it makes sense for New Hampshire.
All right, and if we get those windmills up there, we're gonna have more lobsters because the little baby lobsters like the windmills. Hey,
Want to move the amendment?
So moved by.
So the amendment's already been moved, so we just got to move the vote.
Oh, that's right, seconded. Okay.
You want to third it? All right. So, any further discussion? Seeing none. So,
Senator Perkins Quokka.
Yeah. Chairman, just a question for Senator Waters, if I might. I just want to make sure, I had spoken with Gino Marconi about this, and essentially I understand the intent of the amendment and I'm planning to support it, but I just want to clarify that this sort of preserves intact the ability to track the source of lobster meat and provides the same protections against short lobster sales that exist under current law, but obviously creates some exemption from regulation where it makes sense to all the parties involved.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So it has a two-part answer. I mean, it's yes and yes, but the first part answering yes is that this does not affect the current regulatory system we have for the lobstermen. And then also it retains, you'll see, licensed wholesaler or processor. So that's important. That's what regulate. That's who we ought to regulate. That's who we ought to license. And here we've removed the licenses for the restaurants. And so we're convinced that we can protect as we should, and also give help the restaurants out.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
any further discussion? We'll start off with Senator Gaida. You're at the top of the heap here.
Yes.
And Senator Waters?
Yep.
Senator Gray?
Yes.
Senator Perkins Quokka?
Yes.
Senator Avard, yes. All right, let's move on to the bill itself.
I'll move on to pass as amended.
And seconded by
I'll second.
Senator Waters. All right, we'll start off with you, Senator Gray,
Yes.
Senator Waters,
Yes.
Senator Perkins Quokka,
Yes.
Senator Gaida,
Yes.
Senator Avard, yes. What do you think about a consent on this, or does somebody want to talk about lobsters?
Oh, I would move consent. I mean, if Senator Rishardi wants to talk about it, she can pull it off, but
Second.
All right, so let's start off with the vice chair, Senator Gaida.
Yes.
Consent, Senator Waters,
yes.
Senator Perkins Quokka,
Yes.
Senator Gray,
Yes.
Senator Avard, yes, on consent. And we'll let Senator Gaida take it out for consent. All right, and is there a motion to move out of exec?
Moved.
Mr. Chairman, do you want to do 146?
146. I hadn't prepared to do 146 yet. Can we do 146 today?
I think we're ready to go. I have one tiny change to it, but if Griffin wants to pull it up, we have, what's the most recent amendment on this one?
Hold on 1 second. 0667S.
Yeah. And I do think there's something we might want to do to it, but so I'll just run through it again. Coastal program, that was good to go. The solid waste disposal reduction goal, again, there's some language changes in there that DES wanted, that we heard about in the hearing. And one little wiggle this time was to ensure that the timing, that there was the original 1998 bill that said renew it every 6 years. And as it turns out, 2022 would have been in that cycle of renewal. They stopped doing the plans. So it just is references made to that we're in fact continuing that original pattern, but we'll do this one. And then from now on, it's every 10 years. So that's there. And then we have goals, strategies, and actions necessary. There have been some hopes that just rather than say discuss it, that the plan should have goals, strategies, and actions. Great. That's what planning does. So people wanted that. That was good to have there.
Yeah.
Number 3 on the zoonotic diseases, as I said in the hearing, this had all gotten worked out with Fish and Game and Agriculture. I did hear this morning from Health and Human Services that they thought that, really they shouldn't do the rulemaking because they don't do rulemaking on food markets. Agriculture does. And I went, duh. And so what we would do is just change Department of Health and Human Services to Department of Agriculture. And that is on line 23 on the page that is in front of us. And tidal waters, everybody was good on, no change there. The saltwater licenses, that's there. I think we discussed it last time, no change there. And then part 6, I didn't know if we needed to discuss that, Mr. Chairman. And I think that there was, I won't put words, and maybe Senator Perkins Quokka wants to speak. I think there was some thought that maybe we didn't think that the renewable portfolio standards language would move forward, but I didn't want to take that decision in crafting the committee amendment. I mean, these are things that the governor has not been pleased with previously. That fair to say?
It might be what kills the bill. So discussion? Anybody else?
A parliamentary inquiry.
Sure.
So am I correct that we cannot take any piece out in committee?
You can amend it in committee.
Right.
By striking language all day long, but it's when it's on the Senate floor is when it reaches a problem. So then you have to dissect it and all that kind of stuff. So this way, you do it in committee with a committee amendment, and it doesn't have an adverse effect on the bill, or it makes it less complicated. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, so it is possible, as we've done in other omnibuses, that if the committee amendment decides to strike a section, then it doesn't appear on the floor.
I think there's going to be significant concern with Part 6.
I agree.
And for the sake of the bill, I would move a committee amendment to strike Part 6 for the sake of the remainder of the bill.
You got that, Griffin?
Yep. So, I mean, the only changes I'm seeing so far are putting in Department of Agriculture instead of Department of Health and Human Services, and then removing section Part 6.
Correct.
Griffin, have you done the report yet on this?
Senator, I'll be quite honest with you. I finalized it this weekend and I accidentally deleted it, and I have to restart the entirety of it. That is something I discovered 5 minutes into today's hearing, and I'm less than pleased with my action, Senator. I'm very sorry.
Well, my memory is good, but not that good. So, Senator Avard,
yes, sir.
I'd like to defer some of this until Wednesday, so we could get that report and help me to refresh my memory.
All right, if everybody's okay with that, I agree.
Sure. Good.
Yeah.
Good.
And so I'll withdraw my motion for the concurrence of the second.
Yeah. But so we semi-refreshed our memory, and we'll take this up again Wednesday. Any further discussion on it? I mean, anything else that we need to change? Just those areas, and we'll wait on Griffin for next week or this Wednesday. I apologize.
I will have that report done by I aim to have it done tonight, however long it takes, but I hate having to write it all up a second time, but that's what happens. So we're going to do it.
I'm sorry for you. It's all right. Well, you do a lot of work and we totally appreciate you. So, and perfect. So with that in mind, so I don't think there's anything else to discuss for right now.
So just one quick word, Mr. Chairman, if I may. So I guess the assumption is that I will work with you, Mr. Chairman, and with all the testimony received today. I would say that, when it comes right down to it, there was surprisingly little disagreement. I think the things that we probably need to change are pretty clear about the procurement amount. I don't know if the utilities will just, rise up and scream or roll over and play dead if we take out the 2.75, but that's it's the other states do it, and I think there's some reason to do it, but if that seems like it would drive up cost to consumers and, anyway, so we can, I'll have some language on that.
Right. And the local
the technology neutral, and then a couple of wiggles to, I guess what I'm thinking I'd say is the RPC ought to consider all these sources and potentially include that would like to see in our request for proposal that would say, hey, when you come to us, slice the pie, give everybody a little slice if feasible. I mean, I would not mandate it. I don't like mandating. I like to say if feasible, if reasonable, and then the governor would get to decide on that. But those are the main things I see.
Right, and we'll work on that before Wednesday.
Got to.
Sounds like a plan. All right. Is there a motion to move out of exec?
So moved. Oh, Senator Gray moves. I'll second.
Seconded by Senator Gaitis. We'll start off with you, Senator Gray.
Yes.
Senator Perkins Quokka.
Yes.
Senator Waters.
Yes.
Senator Gaida.
Yes.
Senator Avard, yes, and thank you very much. And so with that, we will all say goodbye.
Move to adjourn?
So moved. Oh, do we have to vote on that too?
Yes.
Yes. Don't make us come back if we don't, right?
So that's second.
Committee, thank you for bearing with everything today. I know how wordy I can get, and I'm just so, my brain is so tangled with all this stuff. But and thanks, Mr. Chairman, and everybody for keeping the hearing going. And I really am grateful.
I admire all of you on this committee. I really do, and just you do good work, and I learn every time I come to committee, and I really appreciate you all. So with that, Senator Gaida moves to adjourn. So Senator Gray moves to adjourn. Senator Gray, take up the vote.
Yes.
I'm Brandon. Senator Waters.
Yes.
Senator Perkins Coker.
Yes.
Senator Gaida.
Yes, and
Senator Avard, yes.
Senator Waters, I'm going to call you immediately after, if that's okay.